Okay, so today we're looking at database terminology, and this is our second podcast for the Comp 3 unit of A2. Okay, so what are we going to look at in particular today? Understanding the following terms: primary key, composite key, relational database, foreign key, and finally you're going to do some practice using the data definition language, but we're not going to look at that particularly during this podcast. Okay, so what is a primary key? Now, we introduced this previously in the last podcast. Well, a primary key is a unique identifier for a particular entry in the entity. So for instance, it could be, if we're talking about a student, it might be their candidate number. If we're talking about a video, it might be the video title. If we're talking about somebody who goes to the gym, it might be their membership number. But it's it's a unique attribute that identifies that particular instance of the entity. So there we've got an attribute that will identify a particular instance of an entity uniquely. Okay, so what is a composite key? Well, in some instances, it might be difficult to find one particular attribute that's unique, but a grouping of attributes could be unique. So that would then give you a composite key. So a good example would be is if you've got a table full of names and you've got lots of people with the same surname, but everybody's got a different first name. So the composite key there would be the first name plus the surname. So like for instance, you might have Bob Jones and Sue Jones. Now those are different unique names if you put those two attributes together. So a composite key is a grouping of attributes that identify the record uniquely. So there we go. Okay, so moving on, we've got this idea of a relational database. Again, we touched on it previously. This is where we've got multiple entities within our database and they all relate to one another. This is useful because flat file databases, where we keep all of the data in a single table, quickly become unwieldy. It means that there's too much data there. You're going to get inconsistencies, you're going to have duplicated data, and this is obviously going to cause us problems. We're right back at the same problems we identified with the traditional approach to file databases. So duplicated data, inconsistency problems. The relational database allows us to take those away and have different tables for each type of information. So for instance, you might have a table full of films, and then you want to know the genre of each film. Now there's only so many genres, so it makes sense to have a different entity or a different table with a list of genres in it, and then relate each of the films to that genre table to get the particular genre that's required. That way that we make sure that we're not misspelling any genres, or that we've got two genres that have the same name. So gets rid of duplicates, removes inconsistency. Okay, so let's just take a look at this a little bit closer. So here's my flat file database, and you can notice that there's 4 movies that have the genre action, but we've got a couple of problems. We've got a couple of spelling mistakes, so that's going to give us inconsistency. So when I look for action movies, if I spell action properly, it's only going to bring back 2 movies, even though there's actually 4. Because remember, a computer's not clever enough to work out when I've misspelled action that I actually meant action. It only knows when I've actually spelled it correctly. So, got a problem there. So there's my 4 action movies. And there's my 2 misspellings. However, if I take that out and put it in its own table, you can see that I've only got 3 different genres, and then I relate using the primary key in my genre table to the movie table. That becomes then a foreign key, which we'll talk about just in a sec. Becomes a foreign key in our film table, and then we relate those together. So you can see we've got a one-to-many relationship. One particular genre may have many films attached to it, but one film can't have more than a single genre. There we go. Okay, so as I said, the ID there that was in our film table is called the foreign key. So when we use the primary key of one table as an attribute in another to relate the two tables together, it gets called the foreign key. Okay, so let's just quickly recap. Primary key, single attribute that uniquely identifies an instance of an entity. For instance, a membership number at a gym. A composite key is a group of attributes that together uniquely identify an instance of an entity. Again, for an example, if we've got a table of names, it'd be a first and a surname together that uniquely identifies a particular person, assuming they don't have middle names, of course. A foreign key is an attribute in one table which is the primary key of another. We saw that just in our film table there. So we split the genre table off, we gave the genre table a primary key which was an ID, and then we used that primary key in our film table to identify which genre we meant, and that's the link, the relationship between the two. And finally, a relationship database, a relational, should that say even case, is a database that contains multiple entities that are related to each other via foreign keys.